Now, this is a really interesting parsha. It's the introduction of Abraham into our consciousness and into the Torah. And what's interesting, I was reading Lech Lecha, I didn't realize that this one parsha spans 24 years. It starts when Abraham is 75 and it ends when he's 99. So it's pretty interesting, and all the different things that happen. You know, these early parshiot are very chock full of drama and story and narrative. And we learn so much about the characters from these early stories, which, according to, tradition, would have taken place around 1800 BCE, but nothing was written down until 800 BCE. So this is like 1,000 years of telling the stories before they were written down. And yet they're so specific in certain ways. They're fascinating. And we can learn so much about our tradition and about our patriarchs and matriarchs. And this is nothing new to you. They're far from perfect. It's not like they're, paragons of virtue with no flaws. They have lots of flaws. And yet this is the first person that, there was a midrash about how God decided that he would have a relationship with one tribe. He would try not to influence. God was disappointed. He hoped that from Adam and from his descendants up through Noah, that people would follow his basic teachings. And he was very disappointed. This is all, the myth. That's why the flood came. But now God was going to focus on one family and then one tribe and one people, and try just to give them a code that God believed in, a code of life, the Torah, and then hopefully they could influence the rest of the world. And he had different expectations at this point. But if we look at this amazing first sentence, it says, Vayomer Adonai el Avraham, Lech Lecha, me'artzecha, u'mimoladetcha, u'mibeit avicha el ha'eretz asher ani arecha. And it means, and God said to Abram, his name is Avram, not Abraham, Avraham yet. And he says, go Lech Lecha, which is translated here as go forth or get going from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Okay, that's a very sort of, what's the word I want to say? It's just the plain, the Parshat, just the literal translation. But Lech Lecha is a weird way to say something. It literally means go to yourself. Lech Lecha, go to yourself. Or it could be like really go, or go now, or take yourself. But it also could mean go to yourself. And the rabbis and the midrash talk about this idea of go into yourself to find your authentic self. This journey is both inward and outward at the same time. If we're going to look at it on a spiritual level, go into yourself from your native land. So leave your conventional thinking of your country, which at that time was idolatry, but we could talk about any country, and from your father's house and from the traditions that you've known all your life to the land. And this, I was thinking it could be the landscape. It could be the spiritual, emotional, psychological landscape that I will show you. But the word eka could also mean where I will appear to you, is what they say. So it could be go into yourself, find your authentic self, leave all the preconceived notions that you've been brainwashed with or raised with, break free, and I will appear to you in a new spiritual landscape. That's a completely different way to look at it. It's a physical journey and a spiritual journey. I feel for myself and it was a calling, it's God's, God spoke to Avram rather. He had this calling, this inner voice telling him to break free of everything. And I'm wondering, does that seem familiar to anyone? I feel like when I decided to become a rabbi, it was a very similar thing. I just suddenly had this calling. I was a screenwriter in Hollywood, living a completely different life. And people thought I was crazy. And I basically threw it away. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to do something totally out there. I was in my 50s. I was a woman. There were so many things against me, but there was this Lech Lecha, as you say to a woman, go forth to this new spiritual landscape. And I will appear to you. And what appeared to me, I can't say God, but spirituality, Judaism, and all of this Wilshire Boulevard Temple world, which I knew nothing about really, and being a rabbi, and it's a very profound thing to do, I gotta say. I have sometimes thought, oh my God, look at the life I'm leading. I can't believe it. And there's the good and the bad. There's some tragedy too. And then there's some joy. It's such a mixture. And Hollywood, if you know, is just so shallow and superficial. It's really a different landscape. I wonder if anyone else has experienced that kind of cataclysm. Somebody, Sukasa is coming in. I'd love people to appear and so I could talk with you. Miriam.
I don't think I had this kind of epiphany in my life. I remember being called by Rabbi Max Vorspan, being contacted by him, asking me to think of leaving the New York area and coming to live in Los Angeles. I was very young, in my 20s. And he said, we're opening up a new institution called the University of Judaism. And we want you to be one of our first teachers. And this was more than 60 years ago. And we met in a small house on Hollywood Boulevard before we even went in Ardmore Avenue, before we even went into Sunset Boulevard. That's how many years ago it was.
But then was that a huge thing, a huge cataclysm? You had to change everything to do that, right?
No, really. He called me at a time in my life when it was a perfect time for me to do that.
But that was a big journey.
But I didn't really want to talk about myself. I wanted to talk about you, Susan, because I first remember our illustrious rabbi when she was the director of senior projects at the West Side Jewish Center. And that's when I first met you. And I said, go forward, go forward. You sort of hinted that you were really going to think of rabbinical school.
No, I was actually in rabbinical school then.
Okay, and I was delighted.
That was my internship, one of my internships.
Okay, dear. And I was just delighted that you were. And here we are. And here I am, your student, and you're my rabbi.
Okay. So thank you. What we're saying is that this could be a spiritual calling, a spiritual journey that Abraham took, as well as a literal physical journey, because sometimes you do have to leave everything behind to make this change. And sometimes you can do it, where you are, but a lot of times you have to leave, you have to move. And we think about all of our grandparents and great grandparents who basically left their homelands in Europe, like my grandparents, and traveled to America. They didn't speak the language. They had a calling. I want to have a better life. I want to give something. I want to do something else. I'm not going to stay in, for my family, Belarus, and have the pogroms and live this limited life. I'm going to take this journey. I think that we can be called this Abraham's calling is something that can happen to us even today. It could happen. And it took a lot of guts. And he was 75 years old at the time when he had this calling. So imagine uprooting yourself, and his wife was 65 and he was wealthy and he was successful. Oh yeah, Panina, that's right. You're pushing your daughter's, I'm sorry, that's my phone, just ignore it, it'll go off in a minute. You decided to come and live in California, right? Or you came from Israel?
I have a funny thing to tell you. We first came to Canada because the United States didn't let any quota from Israel. So we wind up in Canada, in Toronto, where my sister-in-law lived, and she already had the baby, and I came pregnant with Rani, may he rest in peace. So then Rani was born, and I discovered baby food and washing machines and dryer, and I said, I am not going back.
Heaven.
It's for the birds. I am
Heaven.
staying. And that was it. Baby food and diaper service.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my calling.
You're calling. Well, okay, so then God gives him kind of a, I'm going to show you this place, or I'm going to appear to you. And God says, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. So this is the first time I see the word bless in the Torah, first of all. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. What does that mean, do you think, that Abraham would be a blessing? What does that mean, to be a blessing, do you think?
To be a role model.
To be a role model that somebody can look up to. Okay, that's as one of the things that the commentaries say, that people will say, oh, look at him, I want to be like him. So that's the way to be a blessing. Is there another way to be a blessing?
Oh, sorry. Go
Go ahead, Talia. I mean, Panina, yeah.
The idea that he was a real tzaddik because he got along with all his neighbors.
Okay, we lost you. You're muted now.
Still not
muted.
audible.
Still muted. All right, they'll come back. So somebody else, he was gonna say he got along with all his neighbors. He got along with all his neighbors. He comes to this land and he made alliances with the kings,
Right.
The
Exactly.
neighborhood kings. So he was a model of how to live a life and prosper.
Right. When it was time to bury his wife, they wanted to give him Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and he said no. He paid for it and bought it.
Right.
But the fact that they liked him and he was kind of like a leader within the nations over there, because I guess he made sense. I don't know how to explain it otherwise. But he became kind of like a model.
He became a role model.
Yeah.
And then God says, I will bless those who bless you and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. This is a really interesting idea or promise that so let's think about Jews in the world. And there's modern commentary saying that people that treat Jews well in their country do well. And it goes further saying, not just because they're treating Jews well, but in countries that you treat Jews well, you tend to treat minorities well. And when there's a more peaceful, prosperous society, when everybody is treated with respect, as opposed to anti-Semitism or racism or whatever conflict. So
Israel just signed a treaty with Sudan, and they are going to help them agriculturally.
Yes, that will
big
be
over there, because and how to grow without natural sources of water.
right.
So hydro whatever.
It's going to be a big blessing for Sudan.
Exactly.
Be at peace with Israel, because they'll bring their technology and all about being able to grow things in very barren soil, and how to use desalination and take salt water and turn it into fresh water and whatever. And so that could be the blessing that But I think it's a blessing whenever there is peace among nations or among people. There's always a prosperity, as opposed to spending all our resources on divisiveness, hatred, oppression. We're spending it on improving everyone's life. So, and country, so that's the blessing. Then Abraham, it's very, what's the word? Lofty, this blessing. It's not specific particularly. It's very lofty. And Avram goes forth as the Lord had commanded him, and he took his nephew with him, Lot. And I wonder why. Why do you think he took his nephew? I never thought about it, but Susan Ehrlich? Yeah. You're muted. I don't know what. I don't know. I can't hear you. Try it again. Still muted. Oh my God. I can't wait to.
His son's brother, Haran, his Abraham's brother Haran.
Yeah.
And Abram cared for this orphan and took him with him.
He took him with him, but it's interesting that he never considers him his heir.
Yes.
He never considers him his heir. And later on, when he talks to God, he says, I have no heirs, and my servant Eliezer will end up inheriting everything. He never considers Lot as a possible heir, which I never thought about it, to be honest, till now, which makes, and then we know Lot chose, sorry about this phone. I'm going to just take it off the hook. Hold on. All right. It's, what it is? It's all these roto-calls for like voting and, that stuff. Anyway, robocalls. He never considers Lot an heir. And Lot, as we know later, chooses to go live in Sodom, near Sodom. So I feel like he's... maybe he took pity on him, or maybe he's like, you hear about these people who say, my nephew is living with me. Why? Because his parents kicked him out of the house because he was a problem child, and they couldn't handle him. So he's coming to live with us. And I wonder if they said, just take him with you because this guy is a big problem. And Abraham thought, okay, we'll take him along. Maybe we can influence him in some way. But Lot never comes out looking very good, even when he we don't know how old he is at this time, but if, maybe he was in his 40s, 30s, because Abraham's 75, but he takes, I have a feeling he was kind of a problem guy. Couldn't make it.
What would give you that influence, Rabbi? Seriously. There's no negatives about Lot up to this point in the story.
Well,
it's the sister of Sarai. the brother of Sarah.
Okay.
So this is family. Close family.
He has no wife. Yeah, we don't hear he has a wife because he marries a woman out of Sodom. We know later on he offers his daughters to be raped to the, townspeople of Sodom. He chose this very lascivious, sexually corrupt city to live in later. Which must have appealed to him because basically Abraham says, you can live anywhere you want and I'll live in the opposite direction. So either they're too rich, they say that their shepherds are fighting with each other. So Abraham says, well, you want to go north, I'll go south. You go south, I'll go north. Wherever you want to go. Of all the places, he chooses to live near Sodom and live in Sodom later. So, and he doesn't seem, and he gets kidnapped. We'll read about that in a bit, so he's a lot of work, a lot of trouble. I don't find, but maybe I'm projecting or just thinking, but I don't find anything positive about Lot. And I'm just wondering why, he took him, of all the people, he took him. So unless you want to feel that he starts to believe in the one God. I don't know. Susan.
Well, yeah, well, we're supposed to be impressed by Abraham's character. And that would be an indication of his character, that he took this orphan nephew, and I'm saying orphan because we don't know who his mother is, and he brought him along. And he shows his character by saying, which land do you want? Whichever one you want, I'll do the other. So I think that's another indication of Abraham's
Okay.
character.
What do you think it's an indication of a Lot? Anything about Lot? Do we get anything about Lot?
Well, we learned some a little bit later.
Later, right.
About him. So
We're not impressed. Penina?
It took 300 people to get Lot out of bondage, Abraham. So,
Yeah.
so
The
he
war with
shows
Og.
definitely the story is about what Abraham is at that moment.
Yes.
Later on, maybe when after the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we know a little more what Lot
We know a
was.
lot about Lot and his daughters too, which is
But right away in the beginning, I think it's about Abraham.
okay.
He is and
All right.
what he is.
Okay, so this is interesting. So they go to the land of Canaan, and immediately God makes his first promise to him. He does it like over these 24 years, like several times, seems to make these covenants and these promises with Abraham, with Avram at this point, because Abraham is not having what he wants, which is an heir, a son. But he says, I will assign this land to your offspring. And then Abraham builds an altar, which is like your symbol of the way we worship. They worshiped as they built an altar and they did an offering. So now what do you make of this? Leave your home, leave your family. I will take you to this land. This will be your land. And then the next paragraph is there's a terrible famine in the land. There's a terrible famine and they can't even survive. They have to leave. So what does this tell us about this blessing that God gave to Abraham? And what do you make of that in the narrative that there was now, he was there not so long, maybe, I don't know, we don't know, a few years maybe. And then there was this horrible, no kid, got a blessing that he would have offspring, none. Now there's a terrible famine. He has to leave the country. So what do you make of that in terms of this blessing? Any ideas? Yes, Miriam.
She's muted.
That it was not a blessing for immediacy, that it was a blessing for the future, that I will make you the father of this, so such a great progeny that like the stars in the heavens that you can't count them, that I will do this for you, I will do that. But in the meantime, God was not about to stop any famine, which actually made Avram leave where he just went to. So there was really no blessing that was coming today. It was coming in the future. That's my feeling. I could be wrong.
Any other thoughts about what do you think the blessing, or where's this blessing if he still has no children and he has to leave because there's such a bad famine to a place that he just left everything for? So I read an interesting, Penina, sorry.
Again, I'm going to that point that we made before, that this whole thing probably believing in another God and dropping all your way or previous life, which was not good, otherwise you wouldn't have left. It's a process.
It's surprising.
It's a process. He's telling him, I will show you. Ani ar'e lecha. I will show you in the future. In other words, it's a process. You come to the realization that I'm here and you are going to follow this new monetarism thing that nobody even be able to grasp because you cannot see it. But you stick to it and it's a process. You will see it. Ani ar'e lecha.
Right.
The future.
That's a good idea. I read in brand new interpretation just this week that, he was wealthy. He had brought a lot of people with him. They say he either had slaves or he had converts, The Midrash says that Sarah was converting the women and Abraham was converting the men, but they had a huge encampment. They had a lot of cattle. They had a lot of sheep and whatever. And the idea is that even people who are successful or blessed in some ways are still going to experience the vicissitudes of life. That you cannot live life without experiencing setbacks and challenges and hardships. And that expectation is completely unrealistic. And in order to develop your character, to grow as a human being, to grow as a spiritual being, you have to overcome obstacles. And so this famine or certainly the rabbis talk about, Abraham having some tests, and one test is, will he keep believing while he's waiting for this heir, this offspring that's not happening. But the famine is just, it happens. No matter how well off, no matter how blessed you are, you're not going to be blessed all the time. And this is part of life. This is part of a real life. So he's living a real life where things are going well. And now there's a setback. There's a famine. Now the question is in this story of how Abraham behaves when they go to Egypt. Because this is, the commentaries and the religious, commentaries, of course, are going to whitewash him all the way. But as women or people who love our wives and daughters, we have to ask ourselves, how did he behave? And what do we think about it? Because what happened was there was a famine in the land, and Avram went down to Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was severe in the land. And he was about to enter Egypt, and he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. And it was like, it says, it doesn't really say that in Hebrew. It says, Hine na yadati ki isha yafat ma'at. It's like, oh, here, I suddenly realize, as Hine, which means here, wow, I'm just suddenly realizing you're very beautiful. As if he had taken her for granted, or, one Midrash says they were married since their 20s. So maybe he really stopped looking at her. She was more of a partner. I don't know if she was a lover anymore or whatever, but he said, suddenly he realized in the eyes of others, she would be considered beautiful. Now the Chabad commentary says, I love this because I think it's fun. They had such a chaste, modest relationship. It was only when he went into Egypt where there was the influences of, excess sexuality that he started to, realize it. But he didn't realize it because of her modesty, which is like a Hasidic idea of them. But he says, oh, wow, you're beautiful. So if the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you. So basically he's saying, you're really beautiful. If they think you're my wife, they're going to kill me. So just say you're my sister. And even if they take you, which they did, to Pharaoh, I can live. And we don't hear Sarah's answer. We don't hear what she says. But then, this is interesting. When Avram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how beautiful the woman was. Now Sarah has no identity as herself. She's no longer Sarai, she's the woman. She's objectified, she's sexualized. Pharaoh's courtiers praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. So suddenly Sarah's not herself. She's just the woman, the beautiful woman, and she's taken away. She loses her identity. She loses her individuality, and she's put into the harem with all the other women. So she loses status, and she still doesn't say anything. We don't know. She's very silent. And because of her, so then they gave Abraham a dowry for her. It went well with Avram, and he acquired sheep, oxen, asses, male and female slaves, she-asses, and camels. So
wasn't that given only after the Pharaoh returned her?
no.
It wasn't
given
given
right
as
here.
a dowry?
Right here as a dowry. Yeah. So he lets his wife be taken into Pharaoh's harem. What was he thinking? I mean, how did he think he would get her out? It's a very curious story. Doesn't, in my opinion, reflect well on Avram. And Sarah seems to have lost her voice, or actually she hasn't spoken yet, has she? She hasn't said anything yet. So how do we feel about Abraham? Avram. It's not Abraham yet. Avram.
Not well.
You don't like it.
Severe crack in his character, but typical of the mores of women's value at the time.
Women's value at the time, right. And the fact that we don't know what she said. We don't know what happened, but what would you imagine she would say? What do you think she said? Let's just, imagine for a minute.
I think she was smart and said nothing because she was also a princess. Sarai means somebody who is in charge, somebody who has people underneath it.
Right.
She had her own tent in the city of Hebron, her own state. Her own
Later.
State.
But what about now when he said, pretend to be my sister so that I can live?
I think silence is golden, because maybe other people were in jeopardy if the deal wasn't going to go through. So she
sacrificed herself?
Yeah, she's in charge of the welfare of these people also.
Okay, that's all. I like that. That's interesting. Any Miriam?
I need to ask this very naive question. If you were to tell everyone, hands off, please, this is my wife, and this is my territory, my possession, my wife, but to say that she is not his wife makes her open, and just his sister makes her more open to be taken. I don't get it.
Right. Abraham was afraid that they would kill the husband. Well, we look about King David later.
Oh, with Bathsheba.
Horrible.
So I guess there was this, if you're a king and you want a woman, you'll find a way to get rid of the husband. So perhaps, that was a known behavior among kings. I don't know. I mean, if you know about the Middle Ages, this is horrible. The Lord of the Manors had droit de seigneur, which means the right of the seigneur, of the owner, that he could deflower every virgin before her wedding. He had the right to have the first sex with her because she was a serf on his property before she married. So who knows? And we think about Achashverosh, who took all these women in, you know what I mean? So Abraham, but this is a warrior who took 300 men and saved Lot, fought for Sodom and Gomorrah. And when it comes to his wife, it's like, to save me, will you please pretend you're my sister? And he gets rich off of it.
And it's not the first time. This is the second time he pulled the same subterfuge.
No, he did it later. This is the first time. This is the first time.
Well, he does it repeatedly.
Yes.
And again, it's certainly a huge flaw on any level in his character.
So who comes to the rescue? God. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh sent for Avram and said, "What is it that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife?" Exactly what Miriam said. Why didn't you say so? Why did you not say why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now here is your wife, take her and be gone. Get out of here. And Pharaoh put men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all he possessed. So he escorted him to the border and said, "Get out of here."
Well, Susan,
Yeah.
I think it reflects very badly on Abraham or Abram, which it does when he does it one another time. And then, of course, the worst is when he wants to offer his son Isaac. But interestingly, in both these first times with Sarah, Rambam would argue he didn't trust in God. With Isaac, did he then trust in God? But here, this is a conflict between, as Rambam put it, between human life and human dignity. And when you ask about Sarai, she was willing to sacrifice herself for her husband. I mean, that shows Sarah as a noble character. And when
Yes, or maybe Sarai had more faith in God than Abraham.
that's
That
correct.
she said, I don't think God will let this happen. He didn't bring me all the way here that I would be raped by the Pharaoh or whatever. I just don't believe it.
That's a good-
Perhaps. We hear nothing from her until later when she has a huge tantrum, which I now, because I read this feminist interpretation of this from, I didn't know this, Women from the Wall have commentary now. And I read her bursting out about Hagar. We'll look at it, was like something she'd been storing since the experience in Egypt. So then
I would have said also fast forward to the incident with Sagar. And while you're saying maybe Sarai had faith in God, the incident with Hagar came when she saw Ishmael playing with Isaac, and she was determined, as Rebecca was, that God would, to ensure the line.
Right, but I'm talking about the first one, when just Hagar gets pregnant, because that's in the next weeks.
Right.
We'll look at that. So then we see that Abraham went up from the Negev, and he was very rich now in cattle, silver, and gold. So he was a very wealthy man. And this is the time, I don't want to focus on this, where all of his possessions, and Lot actually seemed to be rich too. The two shepherds, the two groups of shepherds were fighting. So Abraham and said to Lot, you pick the way you want to live. You pick that, and I'll go in the opposite. And Lot went over to near Sodom and moved there. And it says, thus they parted from each other. Avram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners against the Lord. So, I mean, if it seems like it was known, they were known for who they were. But I want to jump now because, we could spend weeks just studying this Parsha. And I want to go to Abraham does another. So time passes. Lot is kidnapped. Abraham takes all of these kings and 300 men, and they rescue them. And they say he went all the way to Damascus to get Lot. So I just read that for the first time, and I went, wow, they went all the way up to Damascus, brought Lot all the way back down. The kings, the king of Sodom said, you take the booty and I'll take the slaves. And Abraham said, I don't want anything from you. I won't take one thing from you, because he had a lot of contempt already for Sodom and the king of Sodom, even though, interestingly, he pleads for them when they're going to be destroyed. And again, there's more covenants and promises from God. Don't worry, your children are going to be like the stars in the sky and the sand in the sea. And meanwhile, Abraham is going, yeah, well, when? No, I'm waiting. And time passes. And we go to chapter 16. By the way, one of the slaves, according to the Midrash, that Abraham got when they left was Hagar, who could have been one of the daughters of the Pharaoh. That's a possibility that they thought, because, he had multiple wives and he probably had dozens and dozens of daughters, and they weren't. So he said, all right, I want to make a treaty with you. We're not going to take my daughter as your servant, which must have been humiliating for Hagar. And, we know the word Hagar means the stranger. Hagar, the stranger. So she was the Egyptian in this encampment of this Abraham's tribe. And so Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children. So now we don't know when this is in the 24 years, but I think it's been at least 10 years, no children. Now she's 75. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Avram, look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid, perhaps, and the word maid is really maidservant is the real word, and have a son through her. And we know that there was this surrogacy idea. You know, you think about American slavery. When a woman slave had a child, it was the property of the master. You know, and it was the same thing in the ancient world, that this could be considered her son if she wanted, Ishmael. And Avram heeded Sarah's request. So Sarai, Avram's wife, took her handmaid, Hagar the Egyptian. And I think it's interesting that they say Hagar the Egyptian to remind you that she's a foreigner, she's a stranger. After Avram had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years. So I was right, it was 10 years later. And gave her to her husband Avram as a concubine. But you know what? It does not say concubine in Hebrew. It says wife. It says la isha. B'teinotah la'Avram isha lo le'isha. She gave it to Avram, her husband, as a wife. Does not say concubine. I think it's, you know what? Translation is commentary. You know, it's what they want you to know or something, but Eitz Chaim, sometimes they decide to translate according to what they want you to know. It's not literal, which can be a problem. And Hagar, Vayavo el Hagar, and he went to Hagar. It says he cohabited with Hagar, but no, he went to her and he had sex with her and she got pregnant. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. Yes, she was lowered in her esteem, but it's like, it's her, I'm going to translate the Hebrew. Her greatness was weakened in her eyes. Sarah's greatness was weakened. Vatakel gvirta be'eineha. Her greatness was weakened in her eyes. And Sarah said to Avram, okay, here it is. This is the explosion. Hamasti alecha anochi hamasti alecha. And she said, I am furious at you. The wrong done to me is your fault. I put my maid in your bosom and now she sees that she is pregnant. I am lowered in her esteem. So the commentary, this is the first time, the first time she talks and says, okay, I have no children. She's still trying to keep it together. And when she engineers this thing for her husband and the woman starts treating her with contempt, Sarah just has a breakdown. She just falls apart and she blames him. So what is she blaming him for? It seems to me she's talking about Egypt and Pharaoh and everything that's happened until now, not just this moment, because it's kind of irrational if you think, well, this is your fault. I suggested it, but what's his fault? The whole situation, maybe you brought me here, you took me away from our home, we have no children, you sold me as a concubine to the Pharaoh, and now I got this slave from them, and look at where I'm at now. And she just finally blows her top. That's what I see this. And yeah.
Look at it slightly differently.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
It proves that he has remained fertile, and it proves to her that her infertility is truly her fault. That's a devastating issue for women.
That is a good point. That is a good point that I never thought of, but I agree with you. That is a very good point, and it would be devastating. I love that. Pnina.
According to Rashi, he interprets that Sarah was a righteous woman, tzadikah,
Right.
which means tzedek is when you are actually know what the just thing to do is.
Right.
So when she comes to him and she gets mad at him, she is actually demanding justice. Look what you did.
Why couldn't
But
you
what
do
did
it
he
to
do?
me?
He didn't do it. And this micro incident,
Uh-huh.
he engineered the whole thing. So to me, look what you did is about a whole, it's
Yeah.
about the whole
The justice.
deal. Yeah, this whole thing. And you're right to be very emotional to say, okay, I'm infertile, but at least this slave woman should be deferential to me or grateful or something.
Huh?
And no, and she's younger, she's beautiful, she's fertile, and it's we have to have a lot of compassion for Sarah. And then Avram, the guy who will get 300 men to save Lot and go all the way to Damascus, says to Sarah, your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right. Like, I wash my hands of this. You women handle it yourselves. He says, she's in your hands. Do what you want. Do what looks good to you. So do you think that was a smart behavior or like a cop-out?
Both.
David, you're sitting there smiling. What do you think?
He's muted.
Muted.
Well, the answer is given already, probably both.
Probably both. That you think that's the way to deal with it when two women get into it, just step
No,
aside.
I'm not saying that. But if you take a small view of the situation, which is just about Hagar, then Abram followed instructions and it turned out badly.
Right.
If you talk about the larger issue, he's just avoiding it by saying you take care of it. So that's why I say the answer is both.
You're right. I think that's very insightful of you. But he doesn't say to Hagar, you can't behave this way. He doesn't say to Sarah, oh, my darling wife, calm down. You know, you're always number one in my eyes or whatever. He doesn't do anything. And so Sarah treats her harshly. She treats Hagar so harshly that Hagar runs away. She just runs away. So we can only imagine that Sarah was really beside herself. And I love what Jeff added. So she's just looking at Hagar must have made her feel horrible. And, so she treats her terribly. And Abraham doesn't intervene in any way to make it better for either woman. And she runs away. And then it says, an angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur. So Shur, and the commentaries say Shur was on the way to Egypt. They don't know, she was running away. She didn't know where she was going, but in some mind, she was trying to go home. And this is the first angel that speaks to a woman. And God doesn't speak to Sarah, he speaks to Hagar. And modern commentaries talk about how, the marginalized, the stranger, the disenfranchised still is noticed by God, still can hear from God. Angels can recognize them, that they're not, because certainly religiously, there was this idea in the ancient world and even in the medieval world that, God only blesses the wealthy and the noble and the royal. And if you're poor or you're a slave or you're a servant, the reason you are is because you're not worthy. Like you're born into your identity and your status, even in the eyes of God. So this is saying the opposite, that the angel is speaking to this poor slave, runaway, non-Jewish, pagan slave woman who has been wronged, and says, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And she answers, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. So she doesn't know where she's going, the commentaries say. They say, where are you coming from? Where are you going? She doesn't know. She's just running away from her. And the angel says, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. Wow. What do you think about that? I mean, why? Why would they say that to her? Do you think? Why would the angel say that?
Well, one is if he has the kid in a desert, there's no one to help her. If she goes back, she at least is in the care of a wealthy family. And they didn't kick her out and she ran away. Although Sarah wanted to kick him out. You know, it just occurred to me too with the Lech Lecha, go into yourself. As we're going through this for the first time, all of these, there's a whole succession of stories where characters are going away, running to a different place, or going within themselves. To Egypt, the first couple. Then they go back, then they go again, and then Hagar goes. It's a whole series of responses to life's, what you said, vicissitudes, but also to conflicts and problems within the family.
Yes, and another commentary says that they're going to Egypt is like a tiny prophecy or like a reverberation of the whole children of Israel going to Egypt later, and that we are a wandering people and nomadic people, and that we did not live in a fixed society for a while. But this running away, so people dealt with their problems. Nobody talked. Nobody, at this point, they just left or they just washed their hands of it. But you're right. And she goes back and then she gets a blessing. And this is a blessing that the Muslims and the Arabs take as, you know, their ancestor, Ishmael, who will be, and they say, I will greatly increase. But the big blessing for women is to have, you know, a lot of children. I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with a child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. So Shema, you hear the word Shema, Yishmael, God heard. And he shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell alongside all of his kinsmen. Is that a blessing? He shall be a wild ass of a man, and his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And I want to look at the commentary here. Hagar, the slave woman, subjected to the cruel discipline of her mistress, will produce a people free and undisciplined. They are to be among people as a wild ass is among beasts, sturdy, fearless, fleet-footed, like the Syrian onager, who roams the wilderness and is almost impossible to domesticate. And then they talk about the hand against everyone, a prediction reflecting the unremitting tension between the sedentary and the nomadic populations of the Near East. So they're saying, when they say a wild ass of a man, they're saying he's going to, you know, a wild horseman, you know, fearless and fleet and, you know, a bowsman, and that there will be this conflict, which there was in America between the ranchers and the sheep herders, you know, or the cattlemen and the ranchers, the people who stayed put and the people who drove their cattle across the land, that he was going to be one of them. And we know that the Arab culture was nomadic. And even to this day, there are Bedouins in Israel and in other of the Middle Eastern countries who are still nomadic. So it's a very ancient culture. And she goes back and they have Ishmael, and Abraham was 86 when Hagar bore Ishmael. So now they've been there since he's 75, 11 years they've been in the land. And we know that eventually he has Isaac. And, no, actually not in this story. In this Parshat, it doesn't have Isaac. The last part of this, because it's time to stop, is the whole covenant of the brit, of the circumcision. And I have told this before, but in case you didn't know, First of all, why circumcise your penis as a covenant to God? Why of all things? And apparently it was a very important thing. The word testimony comes from testes, like you swore by your testes when you made an oath. When Abraham sends Eliezer, his servant, to go and find a wife for Isaac, he says, put your hand on my thigh, but really he's saying, put your hand on my testicles and swear that you will find this kind of woman for my son. Don't compromise in any way. So it's, it's a male thing, because as a woman, it's hard to understand that this cutting your flesh there is so solemn and so serious and so, you can't change it. Once it's there, it's permanent. I don't even know where, I wonder if anybody's ever done a study of how it started, how circumcision actually evolved or became a part of many cultures, but this culture in particular. And Arabs also do it. Muslims also circumcise their sons.
But it's the source of life. And we know.
Good point.
That's very, you can do this to your ear, but that's not a source of life or of any other part of your body. And that, what does God promise Abraham? He promises him a continuing generations, the generativity of it all. So I think it's a very, it's the most important organ in the male body in terms of future generations.
It's irreparable. Everything else you do to your body either heals or corrects itself. This is an irrevocable change.
So then
it's an irrevocable sign between the man and God.
So that's very, Susan, did you read that or did you just think of that?
No, I just thought that when you asked the question.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that does make sense. And I wonder when they decided, how many thousands and thousands of years ago did they decide that this was a symbol of life and the way to connect to the God, your God or our God? Was it anywhere before this? But I might have to do a little research on circumcision because I'm interested now and when it started. But yes.
Think of the perversion of it for female circumcision.
Well,
that's
that's for another
cultures.
That's
for
totally,
reason.
totally mutilation. It's not the same.
That's to prevent a woman from having pleasure and being promiscuous.
Right.
It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, so opposite.
As I say, a perversion of an act.
So I'm going to leave you on contemplating circumcision and the source of life.
So there's this amazing book, though, that a rabbi wrote about why it's, not necessary anymore because of our bathing practices and the availability of clean water. So, that was like a big thing for Daniel and I when I was pregnant. We didn't know if it was a boy or girl. I was like, I don't know if I want to circumcise. He's like, we have to. It's the one covenant we've got with God. And I was like, wait a minute, hippie guy. I married you because you're a hippie. What is going on? And he prescribes to it 150%. Yet he didn't even want God mentioned in our services at our wedding because he's
very interesting.
Yeah. So it's very, I'll find that book and I'll text you the info on that one.
The other thing is when you're researching it, the question is the Christians don't require it. And that was one of the big pluses.
That was a big selling point if you wanted to convert.
Yes.
And it was probably because, I guess, because Jesus took over that role, just you believe in him. And he probably was circumcised because he was a Jewish man.
Right.
But that was a major selling point.
Yeah, it was, because people didn't want to do it. And plus they worshiped the body as kind of a perfection in Roman and Greek culture. So that would be a mutilation. Nina.
The funny thing is that we consider somebody Jewish if the mother is Jewish. So the circumcision.
That's true. It's ironic. The mother is Jewish, but this man has to be circumcised.
Yeah. So you're Jewish when you're born to a Jewish mom, but you still, okay. So the circumcision is the nation. So
I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shalom. Great studying with you. And I'll see you, I'm sure. Actually, I'm doing services tonight, Friday night. It's klezmer Shabbat with beautiful klezmer music if you want to join us.
They played at my wedding.
Oh my God, that's great. Bye, everybody. Shabbat
Bye.
shalom.
Good luck with your back.
Take
Thanks.
some Tylenol.
Feel better, Susan.
No,
Feel
it's
better.
not funny, her back's hurting.
Oh, okay.
Bye, everyone. Shabbat shalom.